she can blame it on me. So just a brief history of my experience of the Peace Pagoda here. Hank Hazelton was working, living here for many years, and he was supporting Native Americans. I'm pretty sure he founded a group called RAIN, Rights for American Indians Now. And at least he was one of the main organizers for that group. And he would go around to all of the powwows and all of the Native events in the areas and always have a table of flyers and pamphlets and petitions supporting the Native people. And especially the Akwesasne reservation near the border of Canada was having, it's kind of like what happened at Wounded Knee. They were occupied by the military. And Hank was very supportive of that group. Akwesasne, they had a newspaper, the Akwesasne Notes, that was distributed all around the country, and posters. They had these beautiful posters, and Hank was living in the house down here, and his upstairs, the ceilings were plastered with just wall-to-wall posters of from Akwesasne Notes, and there were stacks of newspapers. I think they had it was quite an ordeal to clean out his house, I think, afterwards, all this stuff that he had. So he had, I don't know how he acquired this land, but he had 500 acres? 200 acres, so a huge amount of land here. And I was living in New York City working with Native American support group in New York City, and some of those people knew Hank, and so they would say, let's go up to Hank's, and we would come up here and have, just to get away from the city. He had a teepee here, I remember fires in his teepee at night, and he would take us around the land here, and he had this vision of his land being a community, and he took us around and said, this is where the community kitchen will be, and this is where individual people would live, and he had this whole really beautiful idea of making a community here. And sometime later I mentioned to Hank, well, what do you think of a Peace Pagoda here? And he said, well, what's a Peace Pagoda? And he said, that sounds interesting. And at that time, Junsan was fasting in Albany, and Dennis Banks was he was had some federal charges against him, so he was living in California, and the governor at that time, Jerry Brown, who's now the governor again, but Jerry Brown gave him sanctuary in California from these federal charges. And so Dennis could live in California, but he couldn't leave. And then Jerry Brown lost office or finished his term. And Onondaga, Dennis Banks was founder of the American Indian movement. He was very one of the most influential leaders of kind of the Native movement today, and energizing and inspiring many of the Native Americans, and with many walks that he did and many occupations that he did. He was one of the leaders in the occupation of Wounded Knee that famous occupation. And then he did many walks across the country, which the Nipponzan monks joined. And actually that's how Junsan came to America. Was she wanted to be in India. She wanted to practice in India, but the founder Guruji told some monks they have to go to America to support the Native Americans because their work was so important here. So Junsan came over and got very inspired by the Native people and what they were doing here in this country, and recognized the importance of Guruji's message that the Native America, in order for America to change, the Native people will lead that change, and with their teachings, and that it was important to support the Native Americans, and I think we still believe that this country needs that recognition and that knowledge. So Dennis Banks, so then Onondaga Reservation in upstate New York offered Dennis sanctuary, and Onondaga is a very special reservation of one of the Six Nations, and they had an agreement with the state of New York that the police wouldn't come on to their reservation. Wasn't it very special, Onondaga? They were very low key, and I think not as famous as the other reservations, but they held on. And even on the East Coast, when it was decimated, and you don't think there's any Native people here, they have this reservation. They have their traditions, their language. They have they have a freedom school now. They have all their ceremonies. They never lost it, but they were very quiet, and they became the negotiators with during Wounded Knee occupation between the government and the Native people there because of their negotiating skill. But anyway, so Dennis escaped to Onondaga and was living there, and Junsan came to support Dennis Banks, who she had known for many years before then. And she was fasting in Albany at the Capitol. I think every month she would do a fast in Albany in front of the State House in support of Dennis, and to try to get him sanctuary here as well. And so when Junsan was fasting one time, I joined her, and then I said to Junsan, "Oh, there's this guy Hank that has this beautiful land, and wouldn't a peace pagoda be great around here?" And she wasn't that interested. She was interested in her practice and support, and eventually going back to the West Coast to support the Native people there that she was working with. And she said, "Well, have Hank come, visit me." So Hank came to visit Junsan while she was fasting, and she said, "Junsan, what's a peace pagoda?" And Junsan said, "Oh, I can't explain. You have to go to Vienna. There's an opening ceremony there, and you'll learn what a peace pagoda was." And that was that. And then I don't know how this happened, but some Native people heard this, and they raised the money for Hank to go to Vienna. Isn't that amazing? Native people support this American to, and raise money which they don't have to go to Vienna. That's how much they respected Junsan and the Nipponzan order, how much they had supported Native people and their way of kind of giving back, and their respect for Hank. another story, Hank was the Akwesasne Notes. They did, I remember, and I can't find the issue, but they did a full page tribute to Hank when he was still alive. And, you know, a native newspaper doing a tribute to a non-native person, I thought that was pretty special. Just thanking him for his recognizing the work that he was doing with native people. So they raised this money, and Hank went all the way to Vienna to the opening ceremony, and he was so inspired by the ceremony and the work that the monks were doing. I think I'm not quite sure. Jun-san can correct. I'm pretty sure he asked Guruji directly, "I would like to have a peace pagoda in my land." And Guruji looks right to Jun-san. "Okay, Jun-san, this is your next project." And that's kind of how it started. And Jun-san came here, and then Guruji came here and dedicated the land. He also came to Massachusetts, and Dennis Banks secretly left the Onondaga and came to meet Guruji in Massachusetts. That's how close their connection was. He risked his being caught. There's a whole history of how Dennis Banks got connected with the monks, so there's a whole intertwined connection with the native people here, the roots here of Hank and Jun-san here with the native people. And I remember Jun-san when she was first beginning here. She was living in the barn behind Hank's house. This uninsulated barn, hundreds of years old barn, beautiful barn, with all these, you could see through the walls. That was her temple. And, this was all forest up here. And Utsumi Shonin, who's down in the Smoky Mountains, and another monk, Junji Shonin, they helped clear this land. It was pretty amazing. Their story of Jun-san, I think, Hank was so supportive here, and he donated land for the Peace Pagoda here. I remember being here, and many native people from Akwesasne who would come through here, they would stop by here, on their way to New York or to the United Nations or something. And I was very, very impressed. This was their stopping point on their way down and come to see Hank, and then Jun-san was here to see Jun-san. Those were my great memories of the beginnings.
So Charlie-san, you can share a story.
Okay.
Charlie-san is Hank-san's nephew.
My knees are getting old. I used to be able to bend easy.
Let's see.
It's really wonderful to hear the story of my uncle. Because every time I hear a story, there's something that comes forth that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it really shows how big of a story he was.
Mm-hmm.
He's a living story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, the first time I remember my uncle was when my grandma, his mother, was dying. And this was in 1954. I was this big, and I was playing around the house down in Peekskill. And I remember so vividly Hank coming in a white uniform. He was a nurse or a nurse's aide in the VA hospital. I remember he had a glass of orange juice. And at 4 years old, I'm wondering, what's this man doing in a white uniform with a glass of orange juice? Because I had no idea of Grandma dying. I had kind of had a sense. And they basically ushered me outside. And he went in to give her her last glass of orange juice. And I played outside, and then somebody told me later that she had passed. That's my first memory of my Uncle Hank. And so from there, as I grew up, I got to appreciate him as I could. Probably more, to be honest, more than most of my other relatives. And what I can say today that he was an amazing man, and humble, very humble. And with that humbleness, he had a tremendous openness. There was not an arrogance, but he had an openness. And so he and I lived in that house down there. When I was in my 20s, I lived in Albany for a while. I came out and lived with him, and we talked a lot about Native Americans. At the time, I was doing a book on the Hudson River, and it involved Native people. And 40 years later, I'm finishing the sequel now. And I remember having conversations with him about the Hudson River, about Native people, the Lenape people, the Mohican people that lived here. And we both talked about basically how America created a whole different kind of story in relationship to land and so forth, and very destructive. And he, of all my relatives, and my mother's older brother, was very receptive to all this, but everybody else, I would say, tolerated our conversations. But more than anybody else, he was in it. He was so interested in Native people. It goes back to, I think, what I understand is that he always had a peace to him, a warrior kind of peacefulness. I know that he, as far as I can remember, and you probably know this, he was a conscientious objector in the Second World War. But I think he got out of direct action by serving in the, what do they call it? Merchant Marine or, it's kind of a Navy, Coast Guard, yeah, Coast Guard. He served in the Coast Guard. But he was a conscientious objector. And the way I see him today, as I look back, is that if you know who Pete Seeger was, and for those who don't, or you're not that familiar, but Pete was one of the most amazing people in the 20th century, and he not only fought for the rights of black people, for the rights of workers, for against war. Vietnam War, spoke out against that, but he died a few years ago, but not before he gave 50 years to singing for the Hudson River, to clean the Hudson, to heal the Hudson. And I call him, I think of him as the river chanter. He had that kind of relationship to the river. But anyway, Pete had a banjo. Pete was very out there. I can see my uncle as having been a Pete if he had a banjo. He had that same heart. And he did it in a quieter way. But he was out there talking with people and trying to awaken them. And after we had our conversations about Native people down at the house, he really got into it. I moved to New Mexico to be closer to Native people in the early 80s. And so I didn't lose contact with him, but every once in a while he was asking for money to pay some bills. And I was thinking, oh no, he's going to lose the land because I'm a student, and I'm a grad student, and basically grad students live on secondhand food. I mean, you know, bread that's stale, you know, at the local store. So I couldn't give him money, and I just thought we were going to lose the land. And then 1983, 84 or so, I hear that you came along, and the story that you gave, which was wonderful, the land was saved. And that was one of the happiest days of my life when I learned that this land was saved. And then I came up, I think in the 80s or 80s or early 90s and met June's son, and I said, yes, this land went to the right people, and he knew it. And when the temple was being built, he was still living at the house, but he had had a stroke. Late 80s, 88, 89 maybe, he had a stroke. Then he had a second stroke. Carolyn came along, took care of him, and married him eventually. A marriage that some members of my family didn't approve of. I see the larger view that she really helped him, and I'm very thankful for that. And a few other people in my family are too. But anyway, besides that, I today am so happy that he transferred the land over to your organization and to the right thinking, the right attitude, and so forth. And I know, I feel his presence when I come here. When I come down the road here, I'm not in the present, I'm in the past. But the past is part of the present, because there is no boundaries in time. As far as I'm concerned, Einstein's concerned, probably Buddhism is concerned. I don't know much about it, but there is no real boundaries between past, present, and future. This is very rational. And when I come here, I'm part of him. I feel his presence. And I would say that he is very happy that this is happening and that this remembrance of him is being given. Thank you.
Thank you.